Right, we are officially recording. So happy Friday, everyone. My name is April White, and I'm filling in as host today for cataloging and catching up for Nebraska Museums Association President Kelly Bacon. And I'm a member of the NMA board, and then I'm also the director of the G.W. Frank Museum of History and Culture here in Kearney, Nebraska. And so I'm actually at the museum today, which is interesting because I've been kind of working remotely. I don't know if anybody else is still doing partially remote work, but we're also on a campus, so that makes it a little bit different for us, I guess. But I'd like to welcome all of our NMA members to this month's Cataloging and Catching Up, a monthly Zoom chat to discuss relevant museum topics. Sadly, there's only one more of these after this one today, and the next one will be, unless we decide to continue it, which we might, but as of right now, the last scheduling we have is for Friday, October 23rd at 3 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Mountain Time. And so all of these meetings, they are recorded, and so they'll be available to watch later at any time. And so basically each month we have a different theme and then a host leading the conversation. So today, or September's theme, is how to positively and responsibly deaccession from your museum's collection. And so not everyone in this meeting has video capability. So if you have a question, please tell us your name and your organization before you ask the question. And you can also use the chat feature, which is in Zoom, and we will ask the question for you if you'd prefer us to do it that way. Having multiple people in the meeting, we do ask that you mute yourself unless you're the one speaking. And so just to get us started here with this deaccessioning and this idea of deaccessioning out of your collection. I volunteered to run this particular session because I have fairly extensive experience with deaccessioning items from a permanent museum collection. A few years ago, the Frank Museum here, the G.W. Frank Museum, underwent a massive deaccessioning project where we ended up deaccessioning over 400 objects from our permanent collection. And deaccessioning always kind of seems initially like a little, what I would say is like eyebrow raising, like, because it seems odd to, like, initially when you think about it, to get rid of stuff. I think that's what a lot of people think of with deaccessioning, is that you're just getting rid of stuff to clear out room or make more space in your collection, but it's much more complex and than that, and there are good reasons to do it. I can assure you that ours was a very necessary process that we took very seriously. We wouldn't have been able to really proceed with moving forward as a responsible institution if we had left these 400 records just kind of sprinkled throughout our entire collection. And it ended up taking over 3 years to fully complete from start to finish. And I can tell you that deaccessioning is a very involved process requiring great care, due diligence, checking, rechecking, lots of patience, lots and lots of understanding. And proper deaccessioning procedures are essential to ensure upholding your museum's mission and vision. And it's a major part of what we call best museum practices. And so just as selectively accessioning new materials is essential to build and strengthen your museum's collection, it's also important to periodically reevaluate, the existing holdings within your museum and to remove materials from the permanent collection through the deaccessioning process. Those that you find no longer serving the mission, or maybe never did serve the mission, that have just kind of been there since before you were there kind of thing, and you're not quite sure how they got into the museum. So deaccessioning is good for that process. And then, so there are lots of good reasons to responsibly deaccession objects from a permanent collection, but there are also lots of bad reasons to want to remove an unpopular or ill-favored object from your collection. So today, In today's cataloging and catching up, we're going to discuss the various experiences we've each had with deaccessioning, offer advice, tips, if anyone has any questions about the deaccessioning process. And then so we'll have this today as like a good recorded resource for future deaccession endeavors. And so would anyone here like to start or share their deaccessioning story or any tips, advice, or thoughts?
Well, I don't have a whole lot of stories. This is Erin from the Saunders County Museum. We haven't done a lot of deaccessioning, although we really need to, because a lot of organizations like mine, a lot of county history museums, we got our start by people giving us old stuff. And I'm not using that as a derogatory term, but you know, when these county museums started, people saw it as a place to just give them old stuff, whether or not it had any sort of relation to the county. And we also didn't have a structured collecting policy. We didn't have a mission, so we weren't focused in what we were collecting. And so we have a lot of stuff that we got just because it was old. And so, like I said, we haven't done a lot of deaccessioning. Now, last year, I did go through our books, because we've been given tons and tons and tons of books over the years. And so I went through our bookshelves once and came across a lot of books that we didn't need or had no purpose. I mean, we don't need 20 textbooks in Swedish, you know, that sort of thing. So I went through and I found several of them that I think, like I said, we got just because they were old. And we do have a deaccessioning policy, and our policy states that we have to contact the original donor or their descendant or a descendant or somebody. And one of the donors happened to be our local library. And so I'm not going to get into the story of the history of all these books, but I contacted the library and I said, we don't need these books. And she was completely understanding, because libraries tend to go through their books quite often. And they sort of, you know, I think museums need to do a little bit better job of not just their books, but their objects, kind of like what you mentioned. And so, and she understood. She said that I don't want the books back. And so, fortunately, these books were all Swedish, and they were related to a college that we had here in Wahoo. And fortunately, I had mentioned it to somebody that we were doing this, and our current mayor and his wife were going up to Minnesota, where the American Swedish Institute happens to be. And so the board went through the books, and we deaccessioned them properly through our procedures, and then they took the books to Minnesota. So I didn't have to worry about trying to find homes for these books. I didn't have to worry about that. That's really, and then the other set of books that we got rid of, this gentleman back in the 70s had given us, I think there was probably 100 books. And I mean, there were novels and stuff like that, you know, Tom Sawyer, or these people that I've never heard of, but there was no connection to the county. They were just, like I said, old books. And so we went through, and fortunately somebody knew who his daughter was, because he had passed away, and she came and got the books. So I didn't have to worry about, again, disposing of these books. But that's really it. I don't have any other really stories. I'm the only full-time person, and I don't really have time to go through all of these things that probably need to be gone through. And so that's really the story that I had. That's it. I think there's only been one other time in the entire time that I have been here that we've gotten rid of something. And so we've done more collecting than we've done deaccessioning. So I guess that's really my own story. I guess I have a question for you, April. How long had the Frank House been collecting? I mean, you said you got rid of 400 objects. I mean, for me, getting rid of 400 objects would just be a drop in the bucket of the sheer amount of stuff that I have. So I'm just kind of curious how long you guys had been collecting.
Yeah, that's a good question. And everything that you talked about is really familiar to the experience that we had here, you know, like where and when I say objects, like we got rid of 400 objects, it was more like we got rid of 400 records. We started collecting items in the early 1970s when it first became a museum after, because our building, the building that the museum is actually housed in, is the original Frank family mansion. And after the Franks moved out in the early 1900s, it became an administration building for the hospital, the Nebraska State Hospital for Tuberculosis. And then after the hospital shut down in the 1960s, luckily the Kearney State College, which would eventually become UNK, had expanded. And so Kearney State College realized they wanted to keep this building and turned it into kind of like a cultural historic center. And that's the only real like outline they gave. There was no clear mission statement, as you had outlined. That is one of the biggest things why I think people do eventually decide to deaccession, is because when they finally get to a point where they can have a really good mission statement and a clear vision and all that kind of stuff, and maybe, you know, an actual collection policy document, they realize they have a whole bunch of stuff in their collection that just does not serve a purpose, and it does not fulfill that mission. So we'd been collecting since the early 1970s, and we were under this premise that it was two volunteers, a husband and wife, that were chosen, and they had no museum experience. He was a psychology professor at UNK. That was his, or at Kearney State College at the time, but he retired from UNK. So Kearney State College professor and his wife, who was a teacher. So they were educated and well-meaning, but they didn't have like, you know, the perfect, and honestly, nobody in the 1970s really had any real best museum practices like we have today. It's all like, you know, really good intentions by people who just didn't quite know what they were doing and stuff. And so rather than like your historical society and your collection, kind of the same thing here. They just looked at it as a place for old stuff to go. And so it was stuff that had nothing to do with the Frank family, definitely nothing to do with the hospital years, really nothing to do with anything like early Kearney. It was just like, you know, my grandmother has this old bedroom set. It would look great inside your guys' museum. And so we also, along with those kind of objects that we accumulated over time, you know, because it wouldn't really be until the like 2010s like that we actually were able to get a professional museum person in here, and that was Will Stoudemire. If anybody here, you know, I'm sure most of you probably know Will Stoudemire, and luckily he's actually moved back into Kearney and he's working in the history department at UNK now, so he's back connected with the museum, with the Frank Museum, which is awesome. But until he came in, like we didn't really have any sort of direction or parameters that we really wanted. Like we didn't really have a brand, you know, we didn't have this image that we really wanted to do. And so he did a big rebranding. And part of that was looking at all these old items and objects. Also, the other thing that coupled with that, all these old objects, is there hadn't been an actual inventory done here in like 20 to 30 years. And so we didn't know where anything was located. We had one previous part-time curator back in like 2005 decided to put all of our records onto Past Perfect, which is the database that we use to catalog and store all of our collection information and all the info about each individual object in the collection. And these records, though, were incredibly undetailed. So we had an entire object ID and an entire session record where the only description we had in the record just said like box of linens. Or we had one that said like stack of doilies. We had one that said like belt buckle, etc. And it just had no like, and so for us, we had to deaccession these records without actually knowing what the actual object was tied to them. The way we were able to go around doing this is we established a collection committee, like an official committee to oversee and double check everything and ask any questions outside of ourselves. And then the decisions made by the collection committee to deaccession anything were then taken to our advisory board for final review and approval. And so that's how we were able to, and so then we had hundreds, I mean, it's a historic house. We have 1,000 doilies and thousands of linens. So it's very likely that several of the linens that we just found in the house that weren't numbered, that weren't labeled at all, it was just a blanket sitting on a shelf for however long, and we have no way to identify this blanket or where it came from. It's very likely that that was one of the blankets in the box of linens record, but there would have been no way, because anybody who could have been able to tell us had passed away, the very first curators and stuff. So we've been collecting, yeah, since 1970s. And so, yeah, that's why we just accumulated so much stuff that had really, and we aren't so much as like a historical society. We are a little bit more limited in the number of objects we have. I think there's like, I don't know off the top of my head the exact number, but it's close to about 3,000 to 4,000 objects, not counting, you know, photos and stuff like that. There's thousands of photos and archives and things like that. But yeah, so we've been, that was our deaccessioning process. We had a very unique situation where it was like, how do you, you know, and it wasn't just like one record that said box of linens. We had like 12 records that all said box of linens. One would say small box of linens. And that's like the only, it's like, we can't differentiate there. And so we had to, yeah, come up with, and we worked that into our collection policy specifically. So that would be a recommendation I would have, is to figure out your specific museum or institution's needs, and then work that specific language into your collection policy. Just make sure you get the language approved by like a board or, you know, a committee or whoever you need at the time. But yeah, good questions and good. And that's the other thing, when I made a note here, when you mentioned like how you didn't have to find homes for those books. That's, you know, that's awesome. And that's the one thing with deaccessioning stuff. And then there were, and it wasn't just those kind of records where we couldn't identify what they were. We also had several items that, like, we had lamps from the 1950s, 1960s that had nothing to do with us. They accessioned the flagpole out in front of the house. And it's like, we didn't quite know why. So we had to deaccession the flagpole, and actually we ended up having to take the flagpole down due to like campus regulations and stuff for flags. And so we would reach out to other institutions to be like, hey, does anybody need a flagpole? Or hey, we would reach out to like maybe like a few like 1960s mod type institutions or museums or stuff like that that focus mainly on like the 1960s, and be like, hey, do you want these lamps? You know, that would be a recommendation for me, is if you have something that's in your collection that you want to deaccession, the best thing you can do is see if it can serve a better purpose elsewhere. That makes it a lot easier to try and deaccession stuff. If you're just wanting to get rid of something to make space, because there are actually some stuff in our collection that we weren't able to deaccession, and it's literally just going to sit in a box forever up on our top floor there. But you got to kind of compromise. But you never know, there might be a new institution down the road that could use some of that stuff. So does anybody else want to share any of their experiences that they've had with deaccessioning, or any concerns, or, you know, like, just what is deaccessioning? You know, anybody else?
Well, I can talk about the Nebraska State Historical Society, or History Nebraska, policies, procedures, how we go about it. Some of you might be aware that our CEO, Trevor Jones, has actually written a book or participated in an anthology book about active collecting. And part of that is deaccessioning and evaluating your collections on a regular basis. So he has really challenged us in his tenure here to really evaluate our collections and deaccession and be more deliberate in our collecting and our active collecting, and creating collections policy and a collections wish list and things like that. So we do not contact the original donor. That is old school and not usually done nowadays. Our collections have to either be transferred to another historical institution or nonprofit, or be put up for a public auction. So, and then there's other things as well that aren't possible. We just went through a big process of trying to get rid of some pianos, and not necessarily historic pianos. Yeah, everybody's shaking their head. Everybody has pianos they can't get rid of. It took us 3 years to try to find homes for these pianos. And eventually one of them went to like a piano tuner. One of them went to a nursing home. We kind of really had to think outside of the box on pianos. And anybody who participates in listservs knows that pianos and organs are a universal problem with accessions. You don't need 5 square pianos in your collection. So that's what we did. So one of the things I've been working on for a while is I have I'm undertaking a survey of the photograph collections, and I have over 1 million photographs. And that's just a rough estimate. There's probably more than that. Anybody who's been on one of my tours knows just how large my photo collection is. And it's not terribly well organized. It's sadly to say it's not well described. There's not great finding aids for them. The finding aids, some of them are from the 1960s and are not electronic. So one of this photo survey, my idea is to look at every single collection, evaluate them for condition, for digitization priority, and then put them into, like, think about them as in terms of, okay, can we process this right now? Can we get this into better housing? Does it need better housing? And then, or is this a future grant project? So that, and I've created a ranking system to do that. If something falls below the ranking system, then I take it to our collections committee. We also have a collections committee. It's made up of staff from different departments in the in history Nebraska, and we vote whether or not to deaccession it. Then those deaccessions go to our board and are approved by our board, and then we make the decision to transfer it, sell it, or dispose of it. There are things that we have to dispose of, like, for me, it's things like, melting acetate negatives or nitrate negatives that are too far gone. And I would never make them somebody else's problem. If I can't deal with a nitrate negative, nobody else can. So, so we do have it written in our policy that we can just destroy something too. Our manuscript curator he's run into, as he's worked through his collections, has found that it was a very popular thing back in the 70s and 60s and 70s, is they would photocopy things from other institutions and accession the photocopies. So now those things, we don't need photocopies of somebody else's collection in our collection, especially now that things are online and you can refer things to other people, and it's much easier for scholars to get a hold of those documents. There's no reason for us to keep photocopies, but they're still accessioned and you still have to deaccession them. However, you don't transfer photocopies either. Let's see, what else can I don't, our policies and procedures are available on our website. So if anybody wants to look at the Nebraska or History Nebraska policy, collections policy, it's on our website. pretty good. And so yeah, we're and as an archive, I also have the benefit of weeding, which is I can just get rid of duplicates versus having to deaccession duplicates. So weeding is kind of a little bit different within the archive setting than it is museum or collections thing. So I just went through one family collection and they had, I kid you not, a dozen of the same carte de visite, like little photo from the 1870s, but I don't need a dozen of the same photo. That's just space on my shelf. So I was able to weed out several of them and keep the best copies. So we do weeding, which is something that that libraries tend to do. Libraries do the weeding like with books, but it's an ongoing process. We do it we try to do it every single month. We try to have something to deaccession for every single board meeting. Our board is very well trained in the need for deaccessioning and the need for refining the collection and the need for focusing what we keep and the cost it is to keep those items on our shelf. So I do try to, we have a lot of small family collections that I'm gonna eventually try to maybe move to county collections rather than, I think that they may be not as historically valuable on a state level, but maybe more on a county level. So I might we will be looking into that in the future when I have time.
Yeah, and I think that's always kind of the most intimidating thing about a deaccession process is the time it takes. Plus, you're constantly having stuff coming in still. Your whole museum operation doesn't grind to a halt when you decide to do a big deaccession project. So it's definitely definitely a process and commitment.
One of our biggest issues is that, you know, the State Historical Society has been collecting since its start, which was in 150 years ago, or almost 150 years ago. So there's not clear title for some of the stuff because there's no deed of gifts from the 20s. There's no deed of gifts from 1890. So if I want to get rid of something, then I have to look at the Museum Property Act. And I don't know how much you guys know about the Museum Property Act, but it's very complicated. And I think that the NMA board is looking into working with History Nebraska to update that law.
So Karen, when somebody gives you something today, say they bring in a box of stuff or whatever, do you go through it first and then present it to be accessioned, or
So so if somebody gave me something right now today, I would look through it and then I would make a recommendation to our collections committee. The collections committee meets every 3 weeks. We would discuss the collection and decide whether or not we want to accession it into the collection. It is kind of nice to have that collections committee because sometimes then I can say, well, I took it to the collections committee and they decided to vote it out. They decided not to vote it. So then it's not, then they can't focus their anger at me, even though it was my recommendation.
So what if there are parts of it that you might want, but not necessarily all of it? And just recently I've had people bring stuff in and then they say, well, if you don't want it, we don't want it back. And so I'll take what does apply to us, and then I'm left with other stuff. And I will say that I've spread the wealth. I will use that term because I'll have stuff that that doesn't apply to me, but I really am not going to throw it away. So I will send it off to another organization with a note saying, hey, you know what, this doesn't meet our requirements, but it might meet yours. You know,
Yep, we do that as well. If there's things that I don't think other museums will want either, like lithographic postcards of the Capitol, I know that the Capitol Commission doesn't want those. We have on our temporary receipt, we actually have a spot that they can check that they will either pick the items up, or we will mail them back to them, or we can destroy them, and they have to initial that we can destroy them. So, and that does happen. I mean, that happens actually fairly frequently when so that's one of the reasons we have, we try to get temporary receipts whenever we get things in. Of course, that's not always possible when it's randomly mailed to you, and yeah, with no return with no return address. Anybody get those? No return address on like 3 postcards that you already have 9 copies of? Yeah.
We have on our receipt for prospective donation, I mean, I have like, there's 5 or 6 things on it, but at the bottom it says, okay, if we decide not to take this, we'll let you know. And within 6 months, if you haven't contacted us or let us know, we get to do whatever we want with it.
Yeah, we have
that written down. And so, and they get a copy of that if it's in person.
Yeah. Here, I'll show you. Let me grab one. Oh, I need more. So I don't know if you'd see this. Like, so this is our temporary receipt. It's nice because you don't have to write it. But right here, it's either deposit, if not accessioned or accepted, then it can be returned to the donor. And then here it says it can be destroyed and they have to initial. So if we're pretty upfront when we say there's some things here we don't want, so, or there might be some stuff we don't want, or it might not be accepted by the committee. What do you want us to do with it then? And then they have 3 options. It's all about having good paperwork, I think, sometimes. Has anybody read Trevor and Rainey Tinsdale's book, Active Collecting, or seen his talk? There's a copy of his talk actually on the Nebraska Museum. He gave the keynote speech at the NMA conference that was in Lincoln. What was that, 3 years ago, Mary? 3 or 4 years? Something like that. But it's still online on the Nebraska Museums Association website, if anybody wants to check it out. Or his PowerPoint slides. I don't know. I don't think we recorded it, but his PowerPoint slides are.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I remember it.
Mm-hmm. It's really made us think about how we collect a lot differently. So.
I like this conversation with talking about active accessioning as part of deaccessioning, because it really is like this idea of like deliberate collecting and making sure you have like a collections committee that you can be like, as a backup and to help set those parameters. It actually prevents future deaccessioning. So like that, it is very important to talk about this sort of like active accessioning and deliberate collecting as part of preventative deaccessioning kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the 2 things go hand in hand. Definitely that once you start going through your collection, and it's really important to do a survey of your collection too, I think, and really do an inventory and have a really good idea of what you have. And I think as you start going through that, you'll say, wow, do I really need 9 irons? Or do I really need 9 of these, whatever. I swear I have every Omaha collection I have has like the same 5 postcards from the Easter tornado. I don't need that many of the same postcards, surprisingly. And I think that then it really starts making you think about what you're taking in. I mean, it's not feasible to take, just because a photo is old doesn't mean that we need to take it. And I find that a lot with, it's really hard when you're dealing with people's family collections and their genealogy collections. We just don't, and we're able to track through our reference collection or reference room what collections are being used. And we have a trend, we have like years of data for that. And family collections don't get used only by families. They're not. So then, is it really worth that money that they sit on my shelf and they take up the real estate on my shelf, and the museum, commits to it long term monetarily to take care of that collection forever, and people might not know we even have it, whereas they're probably going to the county level or the library level and saying, do you have photos of my family? And then they're saying no, and they're not checking the Nebraska State Historical Society.
How do you deal with, it's a different little piece there, but as I was finishing up a little gal at the desk here, how do you deal with a dementia patient coming in and bringing things from it's like, that part of the difficult part of that of, aren't you checking with your family? That piece.
That's a really good question. I actually we out here have never had to deal with a situation like that before, but does anybody have any ideas or input?
So that surely has to be a treasure in their family that they want. It's like, you need to keep this in your family, you need to do. But this person that was at my desk has just left, has been in multiple times. This time she brought me what she wanted to give me, but not quite yet. Her Super 8 film that was from Minnesota.
Right.
It's like,
right.
So it's like, you need to check with your family. You go take it back and check with your family. But some of those pieces, like, yeah, I want to have it, but you need to check with your family. So that odd, she's still driving, and I'm thinking, I hope she gets back to where she needs to go on Junk Jaunt Day downtown here. It's like, I looked out front here and it was like, traffic is everywhere. So it's like, oh my gosh. It is broken down.
I guess it's just being patient with the person and asking her continually about her family. And do you know her family, or is her family around?
She has like, she's part of the Taylor family that was in here and part of the Chapin family and the Lewis family. So her family originally had the greenhouse and the flower shop here that's still going on First Avenue. So her family, her older family has, but she's like she was saying, and she's multiple times in this last 2 years, repeat questions and things and doing, and I don't know where exactly I'm supposed to be going next type thing. It's like, well, maybe you shouldn't be driving either, but today, it's like, oh my gosh, not today. But
yeah,
patiently not saying, that's not something I want, but it's like, well, you might want to check back with your family.
I think that's all.
In that, there's not a piece, but she was also on the other part of, they cleaned my place out and didn't leave me the projector or the thing to watch this stuff with. It's like, there's probably a reason.
Probably. Yeah.
So that screening what comes in, but conveniently turning down the person that needs to keep it in their family somehow.
Yeah.
But, sorry.
That's tough.
I guess one thing that I would suggest, I mean, you mentioned that she doesn't have a projector. Do you guys have a projector? And if you don't have a projector, say, we'd love to take it, but we just don't have any way of preserving it right now.
Yeah.
I hate to say putting her off, but you know, just kind of, I use the, I don't want to say excuse, but I use the reasoning, like, we get offered furniture, and I'm like, we just simply don't have the room. I'm sorry, we just don't have the room. And I have been saying that over and over again for, I mean,
Yeah.
but some stuff, I mean, like you mentioned the pianos. I have 9 pianos in my museum, and I would love to get rid of most of them, but, you know, and so, yeah, I guess
I only have 5.
well, I have 9, and just down here, I've got 1, 2, I've got 3, and I'm counting organs too. I've got 3 up at Hanson House, so I have 11.
Oh,
You
wow.
gotta have a lot of sewing machines.
Oh gosh.
I only have 2. Fortunately, I only have 2. But people keep wanting to give me spinning wheels too, and I don't know. Even the station wanted me to have a spinning wheel. I said no. So, kind of get creative.
Yeah. So another thing I just thought of is that she says she's not ready to donate it yet.
Uh-huh.
What you might want to suggest is, I know you're not ready to part with this yet, so why don't you think about including this in your will, or talking to your family about you wanting it to come to us after your death. And
Yeah, and I kind of put her to, you make sure your kids have seen this, or make sure your kids or your family or your aunts and uncles or your nieces and nephews, I guess, because make sure they've seen this part of this. So I kind of said, you check back with them.
Yep. And that's the best way to do it. But I've talked to, like, people send me photos over the internet. It's just like, look at my family's photos. And I'm like, okay, well, thanks.
That's a Mr. and a Mrs.
Those are great photos. Are you going to donate them? No? Okay. We also get a lot of things where they just want to donate their digital images, and we don't accept those either. I try not to do loan for copies, which was a big thing they did here in the 80s and 90s. And we don't do that anymore either. I can barely take care of the physical copies I have. I don't need to try to do digital copies as well. I do make some exceptions for collections that fill gaps in our collection. One would be the Japanese families out in Scotts Bluff. They weren't ready to part with the originals, and but were nice enough to let us scan them. So that was an exception to the no loan for copies.
Another option that we've done for that as well is if somebody's wanting to donate or on the fence about donating photos, mostly, and the ones we're looking for are like the gap years for the tuberculosis hospital. We've offered, like, depending on, how many there are and all that stuff, but if they're willing to give us the permanent copies, we give them a USB drive that has the digital ones on them. So they can still own and be able to look at the originals anytime they want and look at their images. And that way they have them preserved for themselves, but then we take on the actual physical ones. So that's another option.
We do that as well. We try not to do that as well because we have such a high volume of donations that everybody wants to do that, and we can't offer that to everybody.
See, and that makes sense for you guys. For us, we get like, one donation every few weeks, so it's easier for us to do it here. But
yeah, but I also get collections that are like 500 or 600 photographs, and then they ask me for photos of or digital images of everything, and I'm like, no, I'll give you 5, I'll give you a dozen, but I also think it's okay to say no to collections. Just, it's okay to say no.
right, it's like we're kind of in this strange, I feel like we're all kind of in this strange transitionary period where it's just been in the last 15 to 20 years that a lot of museums have really started putting their foots down and saying like, hey, we are our own legitimate institutions. We are here to serve the public, but the public doesn't necessarily like completely control us anymore. And so, but the thing is where we're in this transitionary period is most of the people who want to donate to us are in those older generations where they remember the museums and local areas that would just take anything maybe, or they're getting bad advice from like an old outdated way of thinking that says, oh, just donate it to the historical society, they'll take everything, and they'll take anything. And it's like we're in this weird transitionary time where we have to like kind of like just a combination of being patient but also being diligent, and making sure that we stand our ground, because as soon as you like Karen said, as soon as you do it for one person, you're kind of forced to do it for everybody. And so having a collection committee, having a solid approved collection policy with deaccessioning and accessioning language strongly in place is what's going to help you moving forward as a museum and institution for sure.
We just redesigned our website, and on our website, the whole thing with quarantine cleaning. And so we have on our website, we've kind of a list of the stuff that we don't want, and then the stuff that we do want. And it's very vague, at least the stuff that we do want. I mean, we're very lax on anything from the 50s onward. We just didn't collect during that time period. But, and listed on the stuff that we don't want, are 1907 plat books. I already have a dozen in my collection, and I could really stand to get rid of all but maybe 2 of them. But it has stopped people from calling and asking me if we want this. And there's, most of it's books. I don't know why I'm going back to books, but we're getting offered pianos, and World War II uniforms are also big, because of course that's the generation that's starting to die off more rapidly, and they're cleaning out grandma and grandpa's closet and they found grandpa's uniform, and I already have a couple, and I'm thankful for their service, but I can't take 200 uniforms. There's absolutely no reason for me to have that many uniforms, especially since a lot of them have been stripped of all of, it's just basically a green wool jacket and pants now. So, but I think that's helped us with, at least me, not getting these phone calls. Hey, I found this book cleaning up house and you want it? And they're looking online and they're finding that I don't want it because I already have all of this stuff.
Yeah, we have a similar page on our site too, and hopefully helps it. We also created a form, a potential donation form on our website as well, which has been kind of helpful, streamlining that, getting all the information possible. I wish more people would use it. Especially when they send me random things in the mail. But it is kind of nice because it's up to them to tell us why they think it needs to, and it makes them think about why it should come to this History Nebraska and become part of our permanent collection, and things. So, and then they can upload photos attached to that online record as well, or that online form. So that's always helpful too. So kind of got off the topic of deaccessioning and onto collecting, but that's okay.
I think it all goes together. But yeah. Anybody, we're coming close to the end of our time here. Anybody who didn't really get a chance to say anything yet, Michael, Mary, or Katie, did you guys have anything you wanted to input or any questions you might have?
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm from the 100th Meridian Museum in Cozad. And until last year, I was a grocery store worker. 99% of what you guys are talking about is going right over my head. But I wish I'd known earlier that you guys did this. This is an easy way to sit and learn stuff. But hopefully one of these days I'll try and get some training on Past Perfect and we'll start putting stuff in the computer. And one of these days maybe I'll be able to use my knowledge from this. Thank you.
I'll just say that I don't have any of these problems because I'm not a museum, but I do find your world fascinating. I wish I was in a museum, except for the hard parts.
Well, we do appreciate everything that you do for museums, though. So
Speaking of that, I know most of you have already applied, but I'll mention it to Michael. We do have pandemic relief funds available. If the museum has expenses caused by the pandemic through the end of the year, they should get an application in October 1.
On this relief one, is there a percentage?
No, we don't have the percentage on this one.
The budget, it's just a number.
Okay.
Katie, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I just realized my camera's been off this whole time. My bad.
I thought you were just antisocial.
Just getting used to a new computer camera. I do education programs, so usually whatever gets deaccessioned then ends up in my storage if no other museum wants it, so that way kids can play with all of the stuff. Thankfully, no pianos have come our way though. So yeah, I was just mainly just tuning in to see what you guys are kind of dealing with and seeing if I could pass anything along. We're in a total remodel of our museum, so I'm sure something will be going away eventually.
And anybody else have any, last minute things maybe we didn't get to, or other experiences you maybe wanted to share with deaccessioning, or forewarnings, for future people taking on a massive project or anything?
I do have an anecdote about an organ that we deaccessioned and moved into the use collection, at least temporarily. Tammy, did you get up to see the butcher exhibit?
No, I did not.
Okay, well,
No, I did not. Lance did, and a couple others did, but no, I did not.
Yeah, Lance tried to steal it. So
yeah, it was like, can we borrow that part of this? Aren't you just going to put it in storage? Can't we use that?
But anyways, we had a big furniture grant. I think NEH furniture grant, if I remember right. Again, it wasn't my department, so I should know these things, but I can't remember. And they deaccessioned a lot of things, a lot of furniture. I think several people probably benefited from our deaccessioning furniture. I was able to take one of the big organs and I blew up 3 of the butcher plates to like 10 feet tall or 8 feet tall. No, it was 8 by 10. Yeah, 8 by 10. So 8 feet tall. And you could do like selfies in front of it. And I actually put like an organ in front of the famous photo where the organ is in front of the sod house, or not in front of the sod house. It's actually in front of the pasture, but so people could like pretend like they're playing the organ or sitting next to the organ, and so then it became a selfie wall, part of a selfie wall, and we didn't have to find a home for that organ. But now the exhibit's coming down in October, and now we have to find a place for that organ.
And we talked about doing that kind of same thing and making something in here using the backdrop of any of these pictures.
Oh yeah, it was really popular until COVID.
And doing that with props and whatever in here. So
yeah, we had to remove most of our props after the pandemic, but it was fun while it lasted. And they're talking about turning the butcher exhibit into a traveling exhibit. If anybody else interested?
I was gonna say, I'll add, that's something that we did too with a lot of the stuff that the non-period, like especially a lot of the linens and like costume jewelry that had been accessioned. We put it into like a children's dress-up area, and it's been pretty popular. So, and I guess one thing I will mention and just stress for this deaccession conversation is it's the reason that you have to take deaccessioning so seriously is because when you accession an object into your collection, you're essentially taking legal ownership over it and over the object. And so that's outlined very clearly, like in our deed of gift. It outlines like, I, so-and-so, whoever the donor is, transfer ownership over to you. And so basically, like, I, the donor, am trusting you, the museum institution, with taking over ownership of this. There's that idea of like legal and community and just general trust between the donor and the museum. And so when you deaccession stuff, you have to take it very seriously, because you don't want word to get out that you're just getting rid of stuff out of your collection, because that could have really lasting like legal consequences, and it could like mar or damage the relationship you have with your community as well. And people might, you know, not want to donate stuff, or like previous donors, maybe even people who have maybe given money as well, you know, who have become not just object donors, but they also have donated money and support in other ways. They may be less inclined to continue their support in the future if you don't take the deaccessioning thing very seriously. And that's where we've talked about like having a collection committee and maybe an advisory board, and a policy in place helps legitimize that and helps you explain it to the donor. So if you do like deaccession one of your 15 pianos, and one of the original owners comes by and is just furious that you gave up one of the pianos, maybe before you had real paperwork in place, you can offer all of these explanations, and then you're kind of, I don't want to say like off the hook isn't the right word, but isn't the right phrase, but you can like protect yourself. That's what I'm trying to say. You can protect yourself and your institution. So that is the one thing to just always keep in mind. Take deaccessioning very seriously, and you should be fine. So, all right. Well, we are just about at time here. So does anybody have any last minute ideas or questions or things they wanted to ask?
Just next month, like you said, is the last one. And if anybody has any suggestions for what next month's topic should be, speak now or contact April or I or Kelly.
Yep.
So these have been really good. So
Yeah, I think they've been helpful, and yeah, good for everybody. So thank you all so much for coming and attending today. I think this was a really good discussion. I think it illustrates that we all kind of share the same sentiment when it comes to deaccessioning and the frustrations that can come from it, but also like how it is necessary for future best practices and things like that. So yeah. Well, if anybody has any extra thoughts or anything, or yeah, if you have any suggestions, like Karen said about the next last one, what we should talk about, if there's any burning things that you've always wanted to know about museums or talk about or learn more about, send us your ideas and suggestions, and we'll look into maybe working that in. So thank you all so much. Have a happy Friday, and I hope everybody has a really great weekend.
Oh, one more thing I forgot. October is Archives Month, and we are hosting an event on October 16th down at the museum. So check out our Facebook page for more information.
Maybe, I was saying, maybe even like archives might be a good subject for the next something about archives might be a good one for.
Oh, that's true. It's October.
So good ideas.
Talk
All
about,
good ideas.
yeah, the gooey guts of archiving.
Yeah.
All right. See you guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.